So, dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. We are going to discuss the twin transition between the transformation towards sustainability, our digital societies on the one hand side, and the sustainability transformation, the SDG-driven transformation on the other hand side. And before I'm asking my panelists to come to the board, I would like to make three brief remarks. And the first remark is the following, and it has the heading, "We did forget something." I remember a breakfast which I had with Achim Steiner in 2020 before the pandemic started in Berlin, and we discussed the digital dimension of sustainable development. And we noted that actually in the 2015 agenda, the 2015 Sustainable Development Goals, we have forgotten this incredible transformation which is being driven by digital technologies and innovations. And we said that these two communities, which we need to bring these kind of trends together, are still very isolated from each another. So what we said is that we forgot something. We need to do something. We need to bring this transformation towards sustainability and transformation towards digital societies together. We need to combine the discourses around those. A lot of things to do. This was in 2020. So my main point regarding the first heading is that we needed to change. And we noted this in 2020 during the first phase of the implementation of the SDGs. This dimension has been forgotten. My second point is then, and this is a very optimistic observation, we are making a lot of progress now in this field, or we made a lot of progress now in this field during the last 5 years. We got the Global Digital Compact a few weeks ago only. We have now an AI-oriented advisory board, scientific advisory board, to the Secretary General of the United Nations. We have digital days to think about the twin transformation in the headquarters of the United Nations. We have worldwide discussions about how to develop AI-driven and digital infrastructures to improve our economies and our societies. And we also have discussions about severe and large-scale investments now in this field, although unequally distributed. So we made a lot of progress, there's a lot of dynamism, and this is what we would like to think about today. Where do we stand actually, having in mind these kind of trends? My last point which I wanted to look at is CODES, which is the coalition looking at the twin transformation between sustainability and digitalization, in which organizations like UNDP and UNEP, the International Science Council, the Future Earth Council, and my own organization, I'm the president of the German Environment Agency, work together to trigger this twin transformation. And we developed a global action plan for a sustainable planet in the digital age, which we launched in 2022 in Stockholm, Stockholm plus 50, some of you might remember that in 2022. And we presented a heuristic there, which might help us this afternoon also to think about the question, where are we standing in developing further this twin transformation? We said the following. We argued that we need 3 shifts. The first shift is aligning the narratives of sustainable development goals on the one hand side with the digital transformation narratives on the other hand side, because this has been nicely separated until a long period of time. We also need to bring the communities, the digital ones and the sustainability ones, together for that purpose. The second shift is then look at the environmental challenges, climate challenges, energy challenges, resource intensity challenges of digitalization and the use and development of AI itself. So how to green digital, how to green AI. And then the last shift is about mobilizing the innovations, the digital innovations, to get the SDGs better done. So this is for us a scheme to understand into which directions we are moving. And this is what we are going to discuss with our panelists now, which I'm asking to come to the floor. Please. Ja. Die Frauen wollen nicht.
Komm.
Please, Somya. And Sally.
You leave me alone out here, are you?
Yeah. So, I will introduce my colleagues step by step. And I will start with the first colleague whom to introduce is a little bit crazy in this environment, Achim. No, everyone knows you, of course. Head of UNDP, one of the most important and creative development actors worldwide. Conceptually, I mean, remember the Human Development Report, which has a long history and shaped global debates, but also when it comes to practical work on the ground. No, when I'm well informed, 140 countries where you are involved. So the way you think about the twin transition makes really a difference. Conceptually on the one hand side, because you are a norm setter there, and practically on the other hand side. And my first question, Achim, to you would be, I mean, if you look at this dynamics which I talked about during the last 5 years, after our breakfast when we noted that we need to bring these crowds together and these two transitions together. How would you describe the role of UNDP in this field? So how did you transform or change the strategy thinking of UNDP and the practical work of UNDP to make this twin transition a reality?
Well, it would be wonderful to say it was all very linear and straightforward, but that probably is not the reality. I think we all are learning in a rapidly evolving landscape. So, Dirk, first of all, let me thank you for that encounter we had, because I think in the midst also of that COVID experience, I think so much was clarified in terms of the centrality of technology to what happens next. And I think to me already in the lead up to that, it had become clear that digital, and with it AI and many other developments that are still sort of on the horizon. I mean, imagine quantum computing for a moment. I mean, another dimension. It would change every aspect of development, every aspect of decision making, every aspect of transacting a public discourse about the choices we want to make as societies. And so I think it transcended not just this notion of how do we take something like digital technology and link it to environment, maybe green transitions, however you want to define that. But it was really understanding how technology could literally pivot us onto another trajectory. Or first of all, simply being able to understand what is happening around us. I mean, imagine watching our planet today from hundreds, if not thousands of satellites that produce endless amounts of data that allow us to monitor in real time what is happening on a square meter of soil, forest, ocean, to the kind of also understanding of how citizens are thinking. So UNDP's route that we chose was first of all to put ourselves through a digital literacy program, trying to make everybody in the organization appreciate that you don't have to be a nerd, you don't have to be a programmer, you don't have to be a software expert. What you have to understand is how does the technology that digital in its larger sense represents make the work of development different. And out of that grew a second very important part, which is that in this day and age where things are moving so fast, the way an organization like UNDP, even a large organization like UNDP, I mean 23,000 people is an enormous workforce to deploy. But actually, if you try to understand how best to use, leverage, and support digital, to do so by thinking that you can internalize that expertise inside an organization would be a big error. So from the beginning, our understanding was how do we embed ourselves in an ecosystem of innovation and learning? Because one of the great things about digital is that it hasn't followed the traditional pattern of starting in one place and then trickling down to the rest of the world. It's ubiquitous. It's simultaneous. And in that sense, we have, as a global organization, discovered the ultimate goldmine of our time, which is innovation happening all over the world, in all sorts of national jurisdictions, local communities, companies, and connecting them. And this has made UNDP today, in just a few years, a very significant partner to many countries who are looking, first of all, at their digital ecosystem, then our focus on digital public infrastructure, because as a development organization, we are highly attuned to the question of inequality, of either having access, whether through simply physically having a fiber optic cable reaching your neighborhood, or whether affordability. And all of this essentially has led us to making digital one of the big portfolios of our development work today, linked, interesting enough, to the green transition, which is happening simultaneously. And I think what codes and the kind of work that we do together, and I point also to my fellow panelists here, also having been a former UNEP staff member, I think there is just an extraordinary age of possibility opening up here. And environmental sustainability, often a generational frustration of how long societies, economies, regulators take, I think we can sometimes cut that timeline by literally 9/10 because of a different way of being able to leverage information. But let me stop here.
Very good. One quick question, and the quick answer is what I would asking for. When you look at the changing portfolio of UNEP, UNDP now in this field, where are you making rapid progress and where are you struggling? I mean, we are all trying to do our best in combining these two transformations. No? How do you look at that? Quick wins and challenging issues?
I think like in all major areas where we rely on technology, on new infrastructure, the poorer you are, the more insurmountable the financing challenge appears. Now, there are some breakthrough solutions. I mean, digital platforms for financial inclusion and transaction have obviously been able to jump that, but it also took 15 to 20 years, let's be honest. You remember those days when people used to drive with bricks in their hands, and today, you know, women in Kenya transact their morning wholesale shopping on a smartphone and sell and repay their loan in the evening. So this ability of creating universal access, affordable access, and being able to invest in a digital public infrastructure, in the upstream education sector, so that school leavers are digitally literate and not unable to essentially find a job in that market. I think all of this takes us back to this challenge of financing.
Very good.
I think it is not so much the technology anymore as a barrier. It is the ability to afford it or to be able to put in place the kind of infrastructure that allows a whole society to move forward with the digital frontier.
Okay, good. Thank you very much, Achim, for your first intervention. I would like to move to Somya Joshi. Very good to see you here. Somya, you are from the Stockholm Environmental Institute, science perspective, applied research perspective, one of the most important agenda setters in the field of sustainable development worldwide for a long period of time, and you are very engaged in the field of the twin transition also. So my question to you, Somya, my first one would be, how is this twin transition and these dynamics I talked about? No? We have the Global Digital Compact now. At the level of the UN, we have an advisory body on AI, so the global frameworks are changing. How is this impacting your work at SEI? And how is this reflected in the research programs which you are developing? And do you see emerging a strong research community around the twin transition already?
Yes, definitely. And I think one of the most exciting moments for science right now is that science is a collaborative exercise.
Yeah.
And what the digital transition and AI are enabling is new insights and application areas, synthesizing information in fields, to give you examples like deforestation using satellite data and AI, energy transitions, so finding new minerals, new pharmaceutical products that could help health in many regions. So it's exciting in the sense that it helps connect the dots. It helps synthesize and see new patterns. But one of the more sort of compelling areas of research and science that we do at SEI is that we lift the hood and we look inside and we say, what is the material footprint of AI? When we talk about water, when we talk about energy, we talk about critical minerals, and immediately you see this landscape of uneven geographies of where the resources are and where the risks and rewards are spread. So I would say at SEI, this is a very new and exciting area of research that we are undertaking.
And when it comes to global initiatives and networks, I mean, when I remember the times when sustainable development was created as a new kind of focus and perspective in science and research, a crowd of hundreds of networks came together step by step. No? If you look at this changing research network worldwide, how would you describe where we stand currently?
To me, one thing that stands out is how fragmented the landscape is, whether we're talking about governance in the digital sphere or in the sustainability.
I'm interested in the interface, actually.
Exactly, yes. And how do we sort of create that interface, and how do we ensure that the governance of that is not fragmented? So both on the global governance side also is an area we're looking at. looking at how digital and environmental sustainability can be governed at a global level.
Okay, thank you very much, Somya, for that. I would like to move to Sally now, Sally Radwan. I'm very happy to see you here. You are the Chief Digital Officer at UNEP. And I have a twofold question. The first one is comparable to what I have been asking Achim. No? How are you translating this new agenda now with the background of high dynamism of discourses and advisory boards at the UN and the global level? How are you translating this into your strategy development at UNEP? And how are you shaping the way you do your work? No? This is the first element. And the second element, as Achim, UNDP, and UNEP, your own organization and my own organization, the German Environment Agency, we founded this global coalition, codes, to shape and trigger the twin transformation. How would you describe what we have been achieving during the last 3 years? We have been working together on the one hand side, and how do you describe next steps?
Great, thank you very much, Dirk, and thank you for the invitation, and great to be here with my excellent fellow panelists. Let me start with maybe a really blindingly obvious statement, but we live in a holistic world that doesn't care about silos. And I think nowhere was this more clear than during the Summit of the Future, the Pact of the Future negotiations, and specifically while negotiating the Global Digital Compact. And when we saw the very divergent views of member states, where it became very obvious that you can no longer make the environment argument and have it stand by itself, or the health argument and have it stand by itself. And I think if we were redesigning the UN system from scratch today, we probably wouldn't have separate agencies. We would have cross-cutting themes that sit under one organization. But that kind of holistic problem solving requires a transformation of everything, right? It requires a transformation of how we work as UN agencies, but also how our member states are organized and view these challenges and their solutions. And it becomes really important to have people like Achim, who moved from leading UNEP to leading UNDP and coming with that cross-sectoral thinking and understanding the importance of environmental challenges and problem solving in the greater development question. But we don't have enough of these people, right? So for us at UNEP, this was a very transformational thing, because we're also thinking about our new midterm strategy now, and it's become clear to us that it's no longer possible just to focus on the triple environmental challenges that we've been focusing on, climate, biodiversity, and pollution, but that we have to link them to health, to food security, to agriculture, to transportation and socioeconomics and migration and disasters and conflict. And we have to come up with these overarching solutions. And this is, to some extent, where I see my role, for example, as Chief Digital Officer, in when we design something new, like we're designing a policy tracker for environment, for example. But you can no longer track environmental policies on their own. You have to also see their impact on the health agenda and on the food security agenda, et cetera, et cetera. So what does that mean? It means that you can no longer, when you speak to member states, your counterpart can no longer just be the Ministry of Environment. It also has to be the Ministry of Health, it has to be the Ministry of Agriculture, Social Solidarity, Finance, whatever the case may be. And that requires a lot of transformational thinking on our people and our own skills, but also for member states. So one of the things we're doing now is doing a global environmental data strategy led by UNEP for member states. And one of the most important things they asked us for is capacity building, but not in the classic sense of we need to empower and educate data scientists and technology people, but also we need to educate policymakers to know how to make use of the data and how to translate these findings from AI, from all new technologies, into actual policies that can cut across silos and develop holistic solutions. So it's a very transformational time, I think, for all of us. But this leads me to your second question, which is where organizations like Codes come in.
Yeah.
Because in the absence of a structure that cuts across all the silos, it's important to form coalitions that bring all the different silos together. And I think we've done a really good job. I'm personally very proud of it, and I hope you are too, of the work that Codes did in supporting the GDC negotiations, the Global Digital Compact. Because if you're a coalition that brings together member states, science, different UN agencies, and can put forward the arguments that no single member state or no single UN agency can put together on its own, then it becomes much more powerful. And I think this is what happened in the Global Digital Compact, where Codes was able to put forward language and ideas and even entirely new perspectives of looking at things that wouldn't have been possible with just one entity.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I mean, if I'm listening to you, it's interesting to note that at the conference, you are the chair of the conference, aren't you, Achim? I mean, we are discussing many crises, many threats to multilateralism, many really threatening trends which we are struggling with. And now we are talking about a technology which might be a game changer. I mean, all of you spoke about systems change, you spoke about acceleration, about interfaces, about interdependencies. No? Is this the technology we have been waiting for to solve problems into this direction? Would you be as optimistic, or how would you describe the role of these new technologies in the situation in which we are? Somya, maybe we start with you, and then Achim, you follow on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like two sides of the same coin. So in some ways that we see a great acceleration, that these technologies are enabling policy coherence in some ways. You spoke about a policy tracker, so we're seeing amazing advancements of the use of such technologies and tools in increasing transparency, increasing accountability when it comes to policy making in this field. The flip side of that coin is actually the sort of distance that we create between where the decisions are taking place, who's impacted. And this is, I think, the dilemma that we're...
You talked about greening AI and greening the digital, no? Mm-hmm. Do you see progress in this field? I mean, my own observation is that we are better in mobilizing the innovation potential for managing better financial markets. Achim, you talked about that, or forest management and monitoring of ecosystems. But when it comes to making digital and AI itself, no, green, I see very slow progress. How do you look at that?
Precisely. It's the optimization and sufficiency argument. So we are getting better at greening AI with more efficient algorithms, more energy-saving algorithms, less water consumption. But the rebound effect is that the more efficient they get, the more you use them. And that takes us further back.
Okay, thank you, Somya. Achim, the thing we have been waiting for? The positive message from the conference that struggling in so many areas, here's something where we are, at the end of the day, making progress, because in 2020 we were concerned, no? That these things are not coming together. Now they are moving towards alignment.
You know, I sometimes become self-conscious that I might just have this gene of optimism, perhaps, or being hopeful about the future when so many things are not looking very hopeful right now. But it's not, I think, a degree of naivety or just believing that technology will always take us forward. But I think there are so many in our world today who, virtually by being excluded, first of all, from these possibilities, do not appreciate how transformative they can be. And I think, you know, for those of us who are able to, at least in small ways, shape decision-making, regulatory frameworks, policies where inclusion and inequality are addressed head-on and not as a derivative of some market logic alone, I think we do need to speak to the extraordinary power of transformation that digital and AI carry. You know, I was just looking at the wall there. There's a, you know, AXA, and next to it, AXA, Colonial, Nordstern, insurance companies. In UNDP at the moment, through the Insurance Development Forum, we have begun to partner with insurance companies, including major actors in what is called actuarial science, which is essentially the pricing of risk. And there are literally thousands of people around the world who are real nerds, physicists, mathematicians, who do nothing but sit and calculate risk and price risk. Now, more often than not, this might be for some large infrastructure project, but what we discovered, and we are now working with these actuarial scientists, this company, to deploy them in developing countries, because if you can change the way you price risk, you suddenly turn something that is elusive for the vast majority of the population, namely health insurance, into something that becomes affordable. Hundreds of millions of people can suddenly afford to insure themselves against the most existential risk, that somebody falls ill in their family, and therefore all their savings are used up overnight just to pay for your mother, your father, your son, your daughter to receive treatment. And why? Because suddenly the insurance world, the insurance market, can offer micro-health insurance at a cost that is affordable in the absence of having a national health service or national insurance scheme. And this is why I think we have always had this two sides of the same coin. I mean, the risks and the opportunities, but the history of progress of civilizations, of humanity, is never to allow a risk to therefore, in a sense, not take advantage of the opportunity. I think we live in an extraordinary age of possibility. The two things that can ruin it, I think, is first of all, this phenomenon of who has access to it and not. That has a lot to do with who controls these technologies. One of the things that I think we got wrong with digital, frankly, we allowed extraordinary monopolies and oligopolies to grow in a technology that actually we thought would do the opposite. That's a regulatory issue. And I think we are struggling with it all over the world right now. But that's containing a risk. The other one is to actually look at how do we make these technologies more accessible. The insurance is just one. A second Achilles heel, I think, will be the environmental one. I mean, Rob, our chief digital officer, who's sitting there, was telling me as I came up on the podium that total energy consumption of all the data centers right now is the equivalent of one of the largest G7 economies, France. And that's a hell of a lot of electricity and energy that we are using. On the other hand, we are now designing projects with renewable energy sources in the Namib Desert and in many other parts of the world to produce green hydrogen. So, in 20 years, producing electricity is no longer going to be an environmental problem. It's more going to be an issue of how do we overcome this period in between. I only mention these two examples because I think one of the great things about technology is that we're able to make choices. We have agency as societies. So if we don't move forward, we're essentially precluding many people who could perhaps benefit existentially from it because we're worried about some of the risks. Let's focus on the risks. Let's make them a priority and not something that is a derivative. And I think even the industry, if I may use that term, that is engaged in AI got worried some years ago and started setting up its own non-profit platforms because governments were simply asleep at the driving wheel, not putting in place regulatory frameworks, not agreeing on norms. And isn't it extraordinary that in the year 2024, you just heard it, the world turns to the United Nations, of all places, to develop a digital global compact? Who would have thought that would ever happen? I mean, 10 years ago, this would have been the devil's work. Why? Because people suddenly realized that this is a global ecosystem that is now suddenly sprung up, and our Achilles heel is to not work together in trying to manage the risks, including cybercrime, cyber terrorism, etc., in order to protect people from the extraordinary opportunities.
Okay, good. I think these have been very good reflections about risks and opportunities and how to balance those and how to exploit, obviously, the opportunities and avoid the risks which we are having in front of us. I would move one step further in our discussion, and I'm looking first to Sally. Sally, I'm having two kinds of, not of risks maybe, Achim, but bottlenecks in front of myself. And how would you look at those in your organizations and your fields of responsibility? No? And these two bottlenecks are the following. The first one is capacity building within our own organizations. I mean, my own experience is that we build up and are creating now an artificial intelligence lab for sustainability solutions. And we have been hiring a larger group of people in this field. And the interesting observation is that the majority of my colleagues, we are 2,000 in my organization, thought that there are now these AI guys doing crazy things, and my work keeps untouched. And what we are noting step by step is that all the disciplines which are academic disciplines, which are working at UBA, we have 40, 50 different disciplines on board, are being transformed by AI methodologies. So capacity building, how do you look at that in your own organization? What do you think about it? And the second bottleneck which I'm seeing is, what's happening with the Global South? Achim, you talked about monopolies in the field, obviously. So are we confronted with a very simple distributional conflict, a very simple power conflict, that incredible things are taking place in some locations of the global economy and the global society, and the divides between us might even be coming worse? So how would you look at these two bottlenecks from your organizational perspective? Sally, you first, and then we see where we move forward.
Okay. I'll give maybe a more elaborate answer on the first and a very quick answer on the second.
The other one.
Yeah, exactly. So one thing we need to realize is that AI is an ecosystem play. What I mean by that is it's not a single discipline that you educate people in. It's a whole societal transformation. So, I used to lead AI for the government of Egypt before I came to the UN. And one of the biggest pillars of the national AI strategy was capacity building. And what we did for that is we created a framework that included 2 pyramids, because we like our pyramids in Egypt. But one of them was a technical skills, so it was a skills mapping pyramid. And one of them was dedicated to technical skills, but the other one was completely dedicated to non-technical people. So starting from the general public, but also going to domain experts, the people who are going to inform the way that you collect and use your data for training, the people who are going to validate your results, but ultimately the people who are going to use those results. The policy makers, the decision makers, the educators who need to educate an entire generation of how to live in a world that is driven and includes AI. So it's really important that we have this global framework, and I think one of the main things that the UN, for example, could contribute to the AI discussion, in addition to regulation and governance, is a global capacity building framework for AI. How do I do this in my organization, be it a government, be it a UN agency, or be it a school in Upper Egypt? So I think this is something where a global exchange would really come in really, really handy, hopefully facilitated by the UN. We've tried or started doing something like that at UNEP. Longer conversation, we can maybe talk about it some other time, but it really focuses on these 2 sides, the technical and the non-technical. To the second question, I will say that yes, the Global South obviously can't be left out of the conversation, but I'll maybe take a thread out of what Somya said, which is the sustainability of AI itself. Without making the technology sustainable, and this is the literal meaning of the word sustainable, which is that if we don't make it sustainable, we will literally have to stop using it because we will have to cut power from certain parts of the world to be able to power our data centers. We'll have to fight wars over water because otherwise we won't be able to cool our data centers. So it's literally that existential. So we have to solve that problem first, because otherwise there won't be access for the Global South. So I'll tackle the Global South question from that angle. Because we recently launched, actually in New York, at the Summit of the Future, UNEP launched an issues note on the sustainability and the footprint of AI on the environment. And the biggest finding is that we don't know enough. We don't have enough data. We need to understand that entire value chain that Somya talked about, from raw materials and critical minerals, to water, to energy, to emissions, to waste and e-waste. And my personal hope would be that we would have, like we have the individual carbon footprint of flights, we would have an individual AI footprint per person. If I go on ChatGPT 5 times a day and ask a question, how much is that costing the environment across the entire value chain? So I think we need to solve that problem first to enable AI uptake or sustainability also for the Global South.
Okay, thank you very much, Sally, for your reflections. Somya, these two bottlenecks, how do you look at one or both?
I'll take the second one first about this division. Right now we're seeing global compute, so the actual distribution of computational resources very concentrated in a few countries in the global north. In terms of data ownership as well, it is very concentrated with 5 companies globally. So I really feel like what Achim said before in terms of regulation and governance, this is a key area to ensure that the first mover advantage doesn't further exacerbate the divides we have today. And then there is this sort of ghost labor aspect as well, which is where a lot of labor in terms of classification of data and labeling is currently situated in the global south. And that, again, takes us back to extractive narratives, which we have seen in other industries, so not to replicate them. Yeah. That's the first. And then in terms of the bottleneck that you referred to, the first one, I feel like the speed at which governance cycles operate and the speed at which the technology operates are completely out of sync. So we're seeing a rapid acceleration of technology development. And when you talk about capacity building, it's keeping pace with that. But in the governance sector, that's not happening. So that's where I feel that synchronization needs to take place.
Yeah. One observation, Somya, regarding your last point. No? Achim, I think we talked about it. I was the chair of the German Advisory Council on Global Change. We did a report on digitalization, tried to understand AI and impacts on sustainable development. And we had a round of government officials around the table to present our results. No, this was in 2019, so not so long ago. And we asked the people in the room, which government agency, with which ministry has any kind of AI knowledge? No? And we had 3 ministries having AI knowledge in 2019. No? This is changing rapidly, although I must admit that I understand your argument very easily, because we need good regulation to exploit the opportunities we are talking about and to avoid the risk, and therefore knowledge in the public sector is of high importance. Achim, I would, with a look at our last 7 minutes, I would like to move into a next direction. If you look at the Global Digital Compact as a global governance framework now, and think about its implementation. So you as member of the leadership of the United Nations, how do you think about it? What are we going with this document now? What are the impacts? How do we need to move forward? Which actors need to become active now?
Well, as you might have guessed from my description of this phenomenon that the world turned to the UN, I'm still quite intrigued and perplexed by this, because I think many who work in the industry, so to speak, of digital AI and so on, they are not necessarily persuaded that regulation is a great way to drive innovation. So who is behind this attempt to try and find some normative framework? I think it is in part our citizenry, but increasingly it's actually those in government who have seen the extraordinary threats that are also arising from a world that has no regulatory framework. Very interesting for me as the head of a development agency that is known for doing capacity building, institution development. We had a few months ago the cyber chiefs of the world meeting in New York. And for the first time, we were invited to the table, and they actually sought out UNDP because they said, with all the money we've spent on software and hardware, actually we are increasingly realizing that in many countries that have no basic regulatory framework, no institutional capacity, including to monitor and prevent cybercrime and even cyber terrorism from finding a way into this global ecosystem, the countries with the weakest institutional and legal infrastructure become the Achilles heel of a global community. So I think that part has been, to me, one explanation, I think, for why we are now seeing a digital global compact, which, by the way, coincided with 2 countries currently not known for necessarily having a lot of ideas in common, China and the US, almost within 1 month of each other, introducing a General Assembly resolution on digital and AI, and frankly, perfectly compatible resolutions. So the first thing I think is trying to understand how we manage and contain the threats that are there, and I think in part the Digital Global Compact also recognizes that. But I want to go back more to the opportunity. What this Global Compact does, it doesn't provide you with a detailed legal framework. It is a first attempt in a world of 8 billion people soon, with 190 plus jurisdictions, to find common ground on what we actually need to work together on. Because you can't work outside unless you think there's going to be two internets, as Antonio Guterres once said to the General Assembly a few years ago. Is that the future? Two internets, two finance systems, living in parallel? And even that wouldn't necessarily work. Another part is this panel. I mean, you know this well. There is, within the Digital Global Compact, essentially a decision that empowers the Secretary General to establish, I don't necessarily want to call it an IPCC for AI, but in a broad sense, it is the United Nations offering the world a way to create a platform where, beyond national interest and national jurisdictions, scientists can actually look at the full spectrum of what will, in a sense, emerge. And thirdly, it's to recognize the urgency of building capacity. I think the commitment that we as an international community invest in one another's ability to deal with this. And let me just say, when I recently learned of a whole new frontier that I hadn't even really come across through my son, who in turn introduced me to the notion of biodigital convergence. There are probably some in the room here who say, oh yes, I know about this. I didn't know about this. I'm totally fascinated by it. It's another dimension to what we have discussed today. Now, for some it is the kind of microchip that Elon Musk or some others are essentially working on in order to help link biology and neurology with technology, with potentially extraordinary benefits and proven. But it is also an understanding of how we can use the ingenuity of biology, of nature, in informing how we deal with something that may seem extraterrestrial to those who are dealing with that, but is now part of our global world. And that's why in UNDP we have a Digital for Planet offer. We have to re-educate ourselves, and in a sense my role as a chief executive is to incentivize a constant way of thinking about how you combine knowledge, discipline with opportunity. And I think we are in a constant learning process right now of how that can be sometimes driven by regulation, by incentives, sometimes simply by entrepreneurship. I mean, if you go across the African continent today, you cannot but be fascinated by the entrepreneurship, the ingenuity, and the possibilities that people are developing. And I think that's the hopeful part.
Okay, good. Thank you very much, Achim, for that. We are running into the last 2 minutes already, unfortunately. So 2 very quick questions, and I'm asking you for quick answers also. Somya, as you are looking at the science networks out there in this field, how would you think needed the big science assessments, so the IPCC work, International Resource Panel, IPBES, how do they need to get these kind of themes on board, which we are discussing this afternoon? With a quick answer, please.
Yes, I'll be very quick. So I think all of these, whether it's the IPCC or IPBES, they are looking at how to do a sort of cross-sectoral view on it. So like using digitalization and technologies to really take some of the key lessons and integrate them. So again, what we spoke about at the start, not operating in silos. And I think that this interface that we touched upon is enabling that to take place. But what I mentioned earlier about the fragmentation, this is what I meant, that the offerings on AI and digitalization exist in each of these bodies, and they are speaking brilliant insights from their perspective, but the connections are currently missing. So I think this is the next step, where we need to connect the IPCC's work on this with all the other institutions that we mentioned. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that reflection. My last question, Sally, to you. I mean, we talked about these 2 transformation processes now, 2030 already in front of us. When you think about the next generation then of SDGs already, Global Development Goals, is there something which you are having in mind? Is there a combination of the Global Digital Compact on the one hand side and the existing SDGs on the other hand side? Do you have an idea about that already?
I don't think so, but I think we should. And I think it should have technology at its heart as a strong enabler, but also a strong limiting factor to achieving all of these SDGs. I don't know what the next generation will be called or how it will be structured, but I would strongly advocate, if I ever had a voice in it, in breaking down the silos, as we mentioned a few times, and looking at the enablers like technology, like data, like power, like education, and having those as the foundation of whatever goals we then decide to agree on.
Very good. Thank you very much for that, Sally. So I'm thanking you for your contributions to the discussion. I'm also thanking you for our cooperation in different contexts and networks. And I think that Achim and Somya and Sally first would like to hear a loud applause from your side. And I forgot it at the beginning, therefore at the end, no? I think the four of us, we would be interested with whom are we talking here? Silos, no? So who is from public sectors here in the room? A few people. Private sector?
In one place.
Okay, good. Science? Balanced, no? So we achieved to talk to the different silos which have not been working together in this field in the past, and we have been in one room now. Thank you very much for that.